Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming through. So I'm going to get right into it because we've got a lot of slides that we're going to try to burn through, and hopefully we'll get through all of them. Lots of slides, lots of demos, so I'll be speaking quickly for the most part. So really quick introduction. I'm Harun. This is Marco. We're from a small company called Thinkst. There's not much value in going into too much of detail, except, of course, for the fact that both Marco and I have been doing pen testing and general offensive stuff for a really long time. So most of the stuff that we're looking at today, although it's a defensive talk, is largely, to use the stolen phrase, defense strongly guided by offense. Okay, and that's kind of what we're going for. Really quickly, a plan for what the talk's going to be about or how we're going to do it. We're going to spend a few seconds literally on history because most of you have that bit. We're going to try to talk about why honeypots have failed, like why we're not seeing as many of them as we believe we should. And then we're going to talk about stuff that currently hinders adoption. And at reasonable points along the way, we'll show you technology that we've built, technology that we are putting up for you guys to use, so that hopefully you don't have these stumbling blocks. So really quickly, some history. If you're going to do a talk like this, the first thing that comes up is this clearly isn't new. If you hit our conference collector site, you'll see we're tracking around 155 talks that have been given just on honeypots. So clearly the stuff isn't new. And if you're talking about deception in warfare has been around for a really long time. Like it probably goes all the way back to the garden. The military have been using it for long enough. The Joint Chiefs, Chief of Staff have a document out called JP 313-4, which effectively talks about military deception and its uses on the battlefield. It's really interesting. It's really worth reading and going through. But essentially what they categorize it as is those actions executed to deliberately mislead your opponent, giving you a better chance of success with your mission. If you want, a bunch of really smart guys, Tom Cross, Greg Conti, and a whole bunch of them, recently did a talk on deception for the cyber defender. It's worth checking out. It was at ShmooCon. I thought it was at DerbyCon. You should check out the slides. They're really worth it. For our intents and purposes, honeypot discussions really went in a certain direction around 1989, 1991. Okay, and the two big events that happened at this point, or the two big things, were two papers. Well, one was a paper and one was a book. And the first one I'm going to horribly mispronounce was Bill Cheswick's An Evening with Beerford, in which a cracker is lured, endured, and studied. Okay, and in it, Cheswick, who was working with a whole bunch of smart people, Shimomura, Vitsavenema, effectively spoke about tracking down an attacker who had broken into his network. Okay, and at the time it was really simple. He faked system scripts so that he could see what the attacker was trying to do. It was one of the first well-documented cases of using a honeypot to understand your attacker. What's really interesting is that in his conclusion, Cheswick asks, he says, I wondered how much effort this was all worth. It was fun, but what's the point of all of this? And later on actually gets to the point where he says it was educational and stuff, but actually it was too hard to get it right. Okay, and already you start to see a dark future for honeypots that way. The Cuckoo's Egg, which came up next from Clifford Stoll, quick show of hands, how many of you have read The Cuckoo's Egg? Okay, we're hitting about 50-50. It's super interesting. It was written way back in '89, but it's actually dated itself really well. Almost as an aside, if you go through it, you'll find some really interesting themes. Like it starts off with a disclosure debate. Like if you find a bug, should you tell people about it or should you keep it secret? The next theme that it hit on was questions on the NSA and did they weaken crypto deliberately? One of the other themes that it hit were, and this one's useful for us, something that says most attackers don't succeed because of attacker sophistication. They just poke at the obvious places and get there through persistence, not wizardry. Okay, and like I say, it's held up surprisingly well. One of the big themes to come through was him complaining when he figured out that actually Robert Morris at the NSA knew about all of the bugs they were being exploited with. And he essentially said, well, hold on. The NSA knows about all these bugs. They're letting us get attacked. How does that work? Okay, and it's a theme that's still pretty prevalent today. But for our interests, the thing that was interesting was actually Clifford Stoll's partner, who came up with the idea of using a honeypot. Okay, they had this attacker who occasionally breezed through. She said, let's put out some files. Let's create files that look like valid files that he'd be interested in. And let's see if the attacker actually goes for it. Okay, so it kind of gave us the start of honeypots as we know it. Around 1997, Fred Cohen released the Deception Toolkit. And then in 2000, the HoneyNet project really kicked into gear. Okay, Lance Spitzner did lots of good work, and lots of us who were working in the industry around then kind of got really useful information from the Know Your Enemy series, okay, in which the HoneyNet's stated objective was learning the Black Hat community, understanding their tools, tactics, and then sharing all of the lessons learned. Now, if we're talking history, there's the bit that says that's distant history, and that was all of the honeypot stuff. We want to talk really super quickly about more recent history. Okay, and you'll see these on almost all the presentations that you see, so I'll blitz through them. You guys know the numbers. Target were taken. The attackers sat on their network for months before they even knew they were. RSA were attacked, didn't know about it till their crown jewels were gone. The guys over at Belgacom didn't know they were compromised till the reporters showed up to ask them how they felt about being compromised. Okay, and that stuff's pretty consistent. If you consider even the NSA didn't know about Snowden's breach till Snowden was well away. Same deal with the OPM. It should give us, at this point, hold on, both these things don't make sense. We're saying that there's technology that helped people find out when they were compromised, yet today people are being compromised for months or years and not knowing that it's happening. Something's wrong here. And the question that has to come up then is, if honeypots were a reasonable answer, why did they stumble? Why didn't they make a better showing for it? And we say they stumbled. I guess an honest question has to be asked, did they stumble? The quick heuristic we're using there is the honeypots mailing list. That graph shows activity on the mailing list over time. You'll notice it hit high in 2003. Hasn't been doing much since then. But what we want is to look at the reasons that honeypots have been faring badly. Okay, so we've got a bunch of them. I'll go through really quickly. The simple one is, it just doesn't demo well. I come to you, I drop down an IDS, I put it on your network, it's going to show you stuff immediately. I put down an IPS, I put it in front of your firewall, and it's going to show you stuff immediately. Part of the joy of the honeypot is saying, listen, you shouldn't get a lot of alerts, it's only when it really matters. So you plug it in, and then wait. Okay, and somehow that's just not an impressive sales technique. Okay, the other thing is that the honeypot isn't preventative, and people for a really long time were still hooked up on preventing all the things. Okay, nowadays more people are starting to come around to, you're just not going to, you need to detect and contain. The other thing is you're selling to defenders, and by their nature, defenders have thousands of fires that they're trying to put out at any given time. The honeypot kind of easily gets ignored through all this. The third one is the one that I find particularly interesting. One of our theories is that honeypots were sold badly. And I don't mean sold in the money sense, I mean they were pitched badly. If you look at academic papers today, you'll find that honeypots are heavily overrepresented. Anyone doing their masters, even guys at the honors level, want to know what to do. Either you put up some Wi-Fi stuff or you put up a honeypot and track results. And it's kind of interesting that if you watch the early HoneyNet papers, all of them kind of unknowingly aimed at this academic bent. It was, let's try to understand this. Let's do research into the tactics. And the whole technology seems to have pigeonholed itself into people who are doing research, trying to study other people. Something we forget from the Cliff Stoll example is that he had a really specific need. Someone was coming into his network. He wanted to know what this guy was doing then. And so for him, studying the attacker made sense. I'm guessing for most of you, studying the attacker is not what you need to worry about. What you need to worry about is, when has really bad stuff happened on my network? And so all of this kind of pushed it into one direction, and it kind of became the redhead stepchild of InfoSec. And in 2002, do you guys remember this talk? Okay, some of you will. This was Gobbles at DEF CON giving a talk called The Wolves Amongst Us. And it's kind of interesting because they dedicated a whole bunch of their time specifically to picking on the HoneyNet project. They actually called people from the HoneyNet project up on stage to publicly embarrass them. And part of what they did was say, well, look, well, actually, I suspect we can...
Projects, the ones that we're learning and catching are the kids. They're really stupid, fucked up, can't figure out how to even install a rootkit type kids. The black hats that know what the fuck they're doing, like, they're not going to be Max Vision.
Wait, he's go. Project HoneyNet's been around for 3 years now, I think. Have they discovered a single unknown vulnerability being exploited in the wild? What?
I think like half of one.
Where's the Ode? And you have to...
So what's really interesting about that video is even RFP, who was up on stage there on the right, goes to defend the HoneyNet project by